He was just mopping the marble floors when she pointed at his chest and scoffed, "That little thing. Is that from a cereal box?" The woman's diamond earrings swayed as she laughed, sipping champagne with her high society friends in the museum lobby. The janitor didn't reply. He just straightened his back, pressed the bronze medal close to his heart, and kept cleaning. But within moments, the heavy museum doors opened, and in walked a four-star general, eyes locked on the old man with the mop. What happened next left the room silent except for the soft clink of the woman's glass hitting the floor. Who was this janitor, really? And why did the general stand at attention in front of him? You're watching True Quiet Stories. Let's uncover what really happened in this one. When Richard Peterson started his new job at the Arlington National Military Museum, nobody paid him much attention. He was assigned to the overnight cleaning crew, sweeping corridors, polishing exhibits, and scrubbing marble floors that gleamed in the light of the nation's history. The staff thought he was just another quiet old man, long past retirement age but working to keep busy. Nobody knew what the medal on his chest meant. Nobody asked, and Richard never offered. He came in every evening precisely at 6 p.m., wearing the same spotless blue coveralls, military straight posture, and a calm silence that made the other staff tiptoe around him. He was respectful, never raised his voice, always did his job, and left without a word when the sun came up. Some nights he would pause by the Medal of Honor exhibit and just stand there for minutes, completely still, hands folded behind his back. A few workers joked about it. Some thought it was cute. Others said he was probably senile. But not one person stopped to ask why. That is, until Patricia Lancaster arrived. Patricia was the kind of woman who made entrances. Heiress to a defense contractor fortune, she had money, charm, and a way of making everyone feel just a little bit smaller. The museum's board welcomed her as a donor, eager to secure a multi-million-dollar wing in her name, and Patricia loved the spotlight. On the evening of the charity gala, the museum's most important event of the year, she arrived in a floor-length white gown, a glass of vintage rosé in one hand, and a cloud of photographers in the other. She barely glanced at the veterans in attendance, treating the event like a fashion show with artifacts. It was during that gala that she noticed Richard. He was in the far corner of the lobby, trying to mop quietly behind the massive statue of a General Pershing. His shoulders were slightly hunched, not from weakness but from years of being ignored. But he wore that bronze medal like it was sewn into his skin. Patricia squinted. "What's that on his chest?" she asked her friend, laughing. "Looks like a medal," her friend shrugged. "A medal?" Patricia giggled. "From what? War of the Brooms?" A few others nearby laughed too. It was loud enough for Richard to hear. He looked up for a second, just 1 second, then went back to mopping. But what Patricia didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Richard had once stood in a very different room, holding a rifle instead of a mop, standing over 6 men whose lives he'd just saved in the sandstorm-blasted streets of Fallujah. He didn't wear that medal for show. He wore it because it reminded him of the brothers who didn't make it home. Richard wasn't just a janitor. He was Sergeant First Class Richard Peterson, Silver Star recipient, retired Army Ranger, and the kind of man who had quietly buried more heroes than most people had ever met, and tonight was about to remind everyone of that. Just as Patricia raised her voice again, joking about calling security to have the janitor removed before he ruins the aesthetic, the museum doors opened with a soft boom. The crowd turned. A tall, broad-shouldered man in full dress uniform stepped into the lobby. The light caught the gold stars on his shoulders. A hush fell across the room. Someone whispered, "That's General Carter." The general didn't look at the VIP guests. He didn't shake hands. He walked straight past the champagne table, the velvet ropes, and the press photographers, until he stood face to face with the janitor by the statue, and then, in front of everyone, he saluted. "Sergeant First Class Peterson." the general said. "It's an honor to see you again." Richard blinked. His lips parted just slightly. "General," he replied, slowly standing straighter, returning the salute with quiet dignity. Gasps rippled through the room. Patricia's smile faded. The rosé tilted in her hand. She was suddenly invisible. "You still wear it," the general said, nodding toward the bronze medal on Richard's chest. Richard nodded. "It reminds me—" "Me too," Carter said softly, then turned to the crowd. "This man," he announced loud enough for the entire hall to hear, "is the reason I'm standing here today. When we were ambushed outside Fallujah, I was a captain bleeding in the dirt. Richard dragged me 3 blocks under fire with 2 broken ribs and no cover. He refused to leave a single man behind. Not me, not any of them." The room was dead silent. "I've been trying to find him for 10 years, Carter said. "He disappeared after he retired. Didn't want a ceremony, didn't want a parade. But tonight, by the grace of fate, I found him again, holding a mop, still serving his country, in his own way." Someone started clapping, then another. Soon, the entire room was on their feet, except Patricia. She stood frozen, jaw tight, cheeks flushed. She hadn't just laughed at a janitor, she'd mocked a hero. The general didn't acknowledge her. He just placed a hand on Richard's shoulder. "We're naming the new exhibit after you," he said, "whether you like it or not." Richard shook his head with a faint smile. "I'd rather you name it after the ones who didn't make it back." "Then we'll name it for all of you," Carter replied. And with that, the general and the janitor walked side by side through the hall. 2 soldiers from different worlds united by sacrifice. The champagne lost its sparkle. The donors forgot their selfies. And Patricia? She finally realized that status wasn't earned through wealth or lineage, but through courage, humility, and honor. The lobby buzzed with quiet conversations. Shoes clacked on the polished marble, and the grandeur of the city's War History Museum stood unshaken under the morning light. The janitor, Mr. Leonard Briggs, moved slowly but methodically, his old mop trailing along the floor like a soldier carrying out a final march. Each step was deliberate, his focus steady, even as whispers about the incident from the day before still floated in the air. He had shown up that morning earlier than usual, knowing full well the kind of stares that would follow him after what had happened. The words from that rich woman still echoed in his ears. That rusty metal probably came from a cereal box. Her laugh had been cruel, hollow, the kind that belonged to people who mistook wealth for wisdom. He didn't argue. He never did. Leonard Briggs had learned long ago that real honor didn't require defense. His bronze star, affixed proudly to his cart beside the folded American flag he carried in a glass case, was not for show. It was a reminder, for him, and maybe for anyone who dared to look closely enough. Yesterday he had been cleaning Nears, the Eastern Gallery, when the woman, surrounded by a group of elegantly dressed socialites, had stopped in front of him, noticing the medal. "Is that real?" she asked with a smirk, as though she had stumbled upon a museum artifact out of place. Leonard, standing upright with dignity, had nodded once. "Yes, ma'am." She leaned in closer, inspecting it as if he were some kind of exhibit. "A janitor with a war medal? That's rich." Laughter followed, soft at first, then rippling through the group like a cruel wave. He had quietly returned to his mop. No words, no retorts, just the quiet strength of someone who'd already faced storms bigger than the opinions of the entitled. But word had spread. A security guard told a clerk told a tour guide. Soon most of the staff had heard. Some offered sympathetic glances. A few interns awkwardly avoided his gaze. He didn't care about the embarrassment. He cared about the principle. And so today, as he polished the floor under the D-Day Heroes exhibit, he wore the medal again, not out of defiance, but because it belonged there. The museum director, Mr. Harmon, a tall man with a stoic presence, approached quietly. "Mr. Briggs, you sure you want to keep that medal on display today? Some of the board members are visiting." Leonard paused his mopping. "I wore it in battle. I'll wear it while I clean. Doesn't change who I am, sir." Mr. Harmon hesitated, then nodded. "As you were?" Across the room, a group of school children gathered near a tank display, their teacher animatedly describing its history. Leonard watched them for a moment. It gave him a strange sense of peace, the idea that maybe, just maybe, these kids would grow up in a world where respect wasn't tied to your paycheck or your uniform. Back near the front desk, the same woman from yesterday had returned. Her heels clicked sharply against the floor as she walked with confidence, flanked by two new friends. This time she didn't laugh as she passed Leonard. She sneered. "Still wearing your little trinket, janitor?" Leonard looked up and simply nodded. "Still means the same thing it did yesterday." One of the women beside her glanced awkwardly at the medal and whispered something inaudible. The rich woman scoffed and moved on. Minutes later, something unexpected happened. A large black SUV rolled up outside the museum, its engine purring low. The doors opened, and out stepped a tall figure in a crisp blue uniform. His coat bore the stars of a four-star general, something rarely seen in civilian spaces. His name tag read, Andrews. General Marcus Andrews, retired Chief of Staff of the Army, walked through the museum entrance with purpose. The entire front desk staff straightened immediately. Security snapped to attention. A hush seemed to fall over the atrium. Leonard looked up just as General Andrews spotted him. The general walked straight toward the janitor, ignoring the stares, the staff, the board members who had begun to murmur. When he reached Leonard, he stood at attention. "Corporal Leonard Briggs," he said firmly. "Bronze Star, Operation Anaconda? It's been a long time." Leonard blinked. His hand slowly rose in a salute. "General Andrews didn't think you'd remember me." "I'd remember any man who saved my unit from being overrun. You were the reason I made it back home. And not just me." The general turned to the gathered crowd who now watched in total silence. "I want everyone here to understand," he said, his voice firm and commanding. "This man is not just a janitor. He is a hero, a warrior, a brother in arms. His name should be spoken with reverence, not ridicule." He turned back and reached into his coat, pulling out a crisp document. "And I'm here on behalf of the Veterans Hall of Honor. They want your story in the National Archive." Leonard took the document slowly, hands trembling just slightly. "I never wanted recognition." "I know," the general replied. "That's why you deserve it." The board members who had been whispering were now standing awkwardly behind the general. The rich woman had disappeared into the crowd. "General," Andrews wasn't finished. "I also have one more request, Mr. Briggs." Leonard raised an eyebrow. "Sir? We want you to lead the flag-raising ceremony next month, in D.C. The silence in the room was deafening. The man who had been mocked just yesterday now stood as the centerpiece of national recognition. Leonard swallowed hard. "Only if I get to come back here and finish mopping the floor afterward," General Andrews laughed. "Deal." And with that, the museum, once filled with quiet judgment, erupted in applause. The echo of the general's salute still lingered in the marble halls of the museum as silence swallowed the crowd. No one moved. The socialites, once so loud and sure of themselves, now stood frozen, eyes darting between the elderly janitor and the four-star general, standing rigidly in respect. For a long moment no one dared speak. Then the general lowered his hand and took a single step forward, his polished boots clicking against the stone floor. "Sir," he said again, softer this time. "It's been a long time." The janitor slowly straightened his posture, his eyes misty and uncertain. "It has, General Thompson," he replied, voice gravelly but proud. "Didn't think anyone remembered." "I never forgot," the general said. "None of us did." Behind them, the curator, who had rushed back into the main gallery upon hearing about the sudden arrival, gasped as she recognized the uniform and the face beneath the cap. That's General Henry Thompson," she whispered to one of the docents, "chairman of the Joint Chiefs." Whispers rippled through the gallery. The rich woman who had mocked the janitor's medal moments before now stood pale and speechless, her cocktail glass trembling in her hand. Her friends who had laughed with her were slowly backing away, realizing the weight of what had just happened, but the general ignored them all. He stepped forward and reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a folded, aged photo. This was taken in 1971. Firebase Kilo. You're right there, he said, pointing to a young, proud soldier in the photo. And that's me. I wouldn't be here without you, Marcus. The janitor took the photo with shaky hands, his gaze locked on the image. Firebase Kilo, he repeated, almost in a whisper. That place. We didn't think we'd make it. Out! You dragged me out after the blast, the general said, voice suddenly heavy. You carried me across that field when I couldn't walk. You refused to leave me behind. I didn't do anything special, Marcus replied. You saved my life, the general said, firm now. That's not nothing. A young man stepped forward from the crowd. He looked like a cadet, barely 20, wearing a museum staff badge. Sir, he asked hesitantly, is it true? Were you both there, Vietnam? The general nodded. We were. Different times, different burdens. The young man glanced at the janitor with newfound awe. All this time, I thought, you were just the guy who mopped the floors. Marcus chuckled, but there was no bitterness in it. That's all I ever wanted to be now, he said. Something simple, something peaceful. No, the general said. You were always more. He turned to the stunned crowd. This man right here, the general began, voice rising so everyone could hear, was awarded the Bronze Star for valor in combat, not because it was handed to him, but because he earned it under fire, and when he came home, like so many others, he was forgotten. There were no parades, no welcome, just silence. The museum curator, still shaken, stepped forward. We didn't know. We're so sorry, Mr. Marcus. Marcus shook his head gently. You don't need to be sorry, just remember us. The general turned back to him. Sir, with your permission, I'd like to see your medal again. Marcus hesitated, then slowly unpinned the Bronze Star from his faded uniform shirt. He placed it in the general's gloved hands. The general took a long look at it, then dropped to one knee, and carefully pinned the medal to his own chest. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. Let them laugh at me now, the general said with a smile. But let them know, I wear this for the man who made my life possible. Then, rising to his feet, he turned to the woman who had mocked Marcus earlier. You laughed at something you couldn't understand, at someone you never saw for who he really was, but now you've seen him. The woman couldn't speak. Her face flushed with shame. Marcus, however, stepped forward. It's all right, he said, surprising everyone. She didn't know. A lot of people don't. No, said the general, but they will. At that moment, several photographers who had come to document the art gala began snapping pictures, not of the displays, but of Marcus and the general. Word spread fast. Someone live-streamed it. And within minutes, the story had begun spreading across social media. The janitor who was saluted by a general, the veteran who had been mocked in silence but honored in public, the woman who had laughed at him had quietly disappeared from the room. Marcus remained. As the gallery emptied, the general stayed behind, helping Marcus clean up the last of the event. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Do you ever think about it? Marcus asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Every day, the general replied. But I don't regret it. I regret how we were treated when we got back. I regret. The people still don't see the scars. They only see what's convenient, Marcus said. A mop in my hand, not the rifle I once held. They'll see now. The next day, the front page of several news outlets featured the photo. A general standing at attention before a humble janitor. The headline, Respect Earned, a Salute Decades Late. At the museum, things began to change. Marcus was offered a new position, curator of a soon-to-be-created veterans exhibit. He turned it down. I'm not looking to be a symbol, he said. I just want people to look each other in the eye again. So instead, he agreed to stay as the janitor. But now, his story was known, and every child who visited the museum, Every curious guest who asked about the man with the medal would be told the story of bravery, of humility, of how one man's quiet dignity shook a room full of power, of how a salute brought justice to a forgotten hero. And still every morning, long before the crowds came in, Marcus would arrive early, mop in hand, moving through the echoing halls, in silence, but now, as he worked, the floor behind him reflected something more than clean tiles. It reflected honor, and this time, everyone saw it. The museum's grand hall had never held such weight. The echo of the general's boots faded, but the silence he left behind lingered like a fog. Everyone, curators, socialites, students on a field trip, stood still, unsure what to say, unsure what had just occurred. The janitor, still holding his mop, hadn't moved. His hands were trembling, though his eyes remained locked forward, glassy and unblinking. The bronze medal sat on his chest, dull against the gray of his maintenance uniform. And yet it burned like fire under every gaze now. Suddenly, it didn't look small. It didn't look funny. It looked heavy, earned, sacred. The woman in the red heels had disappeared, her laughter a distant memory now, drowned out by the storm of respect that had just passed through the building. Her friends no longer chuckled. One of them reached for a pamphlet near the museum's front desk, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Mr. Dalton, the elderly janitor who had spent 3 decades cleaning this place, stepped back. For the first time in years, he didn't return to the supply closet. He walked past the line of visitors now staring at him with awe, past the children who had instinctively moved out of his way. No one blocked his path. It was like the waters of the Red Sea had parted just for him. He walked outside into the light, the midday sun warming his shoulders. A museum security guard followed him out. "Sir, Mr. Dalton," he said gently, almost like speaking to a superior. "That general? Do you know him?" Mr. Dalton finally exhaled. "I knew him before he had his stars," he said. "We served in the same platoon." The guard blinked. That was a 4-star general?" Dalton gave a single nod. "Yeah, but back then, we were just 2 scared kids holding the line together. I saved his life once. He never forgot." The guard didn't know what to say, so he simply held the door open in silence. A small crowd had formed just outside the museum's grand steps. People who had seen the general's salute were waiting, unsure if they should say something, unsure if silence was the best honor. But when Dalton stepped out, several people instinctively clapped. It started with 1 pair of hands, then 3, then 10, and then the whole block. It wasn't applause for a performance, it was gratitude. Raw, quiet gratitude that had been hiding under the surface of this city for too long. Dalton's steps faltered for just a moment. He didn't bow. He didn't wave. He simply nodded and continued walking, back toward his bus stop, mop in hand. But his walk was different now. Straighter, shoulders up, back firm. Later that day, the museum's director called an emergency staff meeting. He spoke in a hushed tone, trying to make sense of what had happened. "We had a 4-star general publicly salute our janitor," he said. "I don't care how it looks. I want every record on that man, full recognition. If we missed honoring him, we fix it now." An intern in the back spoke up. "He's in our system as just Dalton M., Maintenance Technician 3. No middle name, no war history, no anything." "Well, fix that," the director snapped. "He's not just maintenance. He's a living piece of American history. I want a plaque. I want a ceremony. I want his story told." And so, the museum began to change. 2 weeks later, the ISS bronze medal no longer hung awkwardly from a janitor's chest. It was sealed behind bulletproof glass under a new exhibit, Courage in Silence, the story of Dalton Morris. Photographs emerged, black and white images from Vietnam. A young soldier carrying a wounded comrade, a helmet smeared with mud and blood. One of those photos was labeled simply, DM, May 1969. Visitors stared at it for hours. The opening ceremony for the exhibit was unlike anything the museum had ever seen. Veterans lined up in their dress uniforms. Active duty personnel came with their families. A high school choir sang the national anthem. And when Dalton took the stage, not in his janitor uniform, but in a suit lent by the general himself, he didn't speak long. "I didn't want recognition," he said. "I just wanted to keep something clean for the sake of the people who gave everything and didn't come home." He paused, hands trembling at the podium. "But if this recognition helps others remember them, then I'll stand here today and accept it, not for me, for them." The general was there again, too, this time in civilian clothes. He clapped like everyone else, but when Dalton stepped down, the general hugged him in front of everyone. It was the kind of embrace that men who've seen death give each other. In the months that followed, other museums reached out. Dalton's story began to spread. Podcasts interviewed him. Local news called. A foundation formed in his name to help elderly veterans living below the poverty line. He never sought the fame, but he didn't shy away from it either, not anymore. Because now he knew silence doesn't mean you're forgotten, and quiet service doesn't mean you'll never be seen. He still rode the same bus, still swept the same floors when the museum needed him, but now, when people saw him with his mop, they didn't see a custodian. They saw a man who had served, sacrificed, and kept cleaning anyway. They saw a quiet hero, and that changed everything. If this story moved you, consider sharing it with someone who needs a reminder that dignity, service, and quiet strength still matter. And if you haven't yet, be sure to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more voices like Dalton's to light. And now, I'd love to hear from you. What's a quiet act of kindness or courage you've witnessed in your life? Share it in the comments. We read every single one. Thank you for being here. See you in the next story.